Okay, so welcome everyone to our second day of this joint OECD UNECE seminar on SEEA implementation. And really happy to see you all here, really well on time again this morning, because we have a full day of circular economy again today, and we can go straight onwards with the program with our session 2C, which is the circular economy sector, the new developments and utilizing environmental goods and services sector accounts for measuring jobs, goods and services related to circular economy. And for this subsession, we have as a chair, Olivier from Statistics Luxembourg. And sorry, before starting, I forgot, I promised to give Michael the floor for some announcements. So first, Michael, please, the announcements.
Thank you. Sorry, Johanna, but it's in the interest of everyone. Now, very quickly, because many of you have asked me about the dinner tonight, the self-paid dinner, of course. Those who don't remember if they signed up or not and what they chose, there is a list where Evita is, so please check in the coffee break. And those who want to still sign up in the email that we sent to you, I think last week or the week before, with all the instructions, there's the link where you can register. We have to double check with the restaurant if it's still possible, but if you're interested to join, please register now before the coffee break. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you. Sorry, and one thing is, this meeting is full of surprises. The presentation computer does funny things. The mouse has a problem, so it's opening and closing things by its own. So I hope we can survive the first session until we get a new computer or kind of reboot. So my apologies if anything kind of is interrupting the presentations. Thank you.
Good morning, dear colleagues. It's a pleasure for me to chair this first session of the day. Yesterday, we have seen that the conceptual framework of circular economy are composed of 4 different pillars. And it's true that when we start or think to start to measure circular economy, the first approach is to try to measure waste generation, waste use, and more generally, material flow inside the economy. But there is also another approach, which is to try to measure the economic activity of companies involved in circular economy. Means company who recycle, repair, recovery, and this kind of activity. And it will be the topic of this session for this morning. First session, we will learn how we can perhaps extend the environmental goods and services compilation process to obtain new statistics on circular economy. We will learn also that we need to have a well-adapted classification to carry out this task. During this session, we will have 4 presentations. Michael Nagy will recall the conceptual framework. I will present associated indicator to monitor socio-economic opportunities of a circular economy. Isabelle Raymond-Thiedres will talk on the new classification of environmental purpose. Frédéric Norroy will share the French experience for measuring socio-economic aspect of the circular economy by using EGSS data with a special focus on employment. And Joanna Pakarinen will present a comparison of EGSS and structural business statistics data on measuring circular economy. So we will have the 4 presentation, and after we will open the floor for a fruitful discussion. So we will start directly with the presentation from Michael Nagy from UNECE.
Thank you, Olivier. So actually, I'm presenting this on behalf of the task force on measuring circular economy. This will be a rather short presentation. It's more like setting the scene to understand what actually are which parts of a circular economy we're discussing here. We know that circular economy is kind of around materials and value of materials, but of course there are lots of socio-economic aspects that are kind of also relevant for it. And I want to talk a little bit about this, how we consider this in the task force. So I hope I can go to the next slide. Let me see. Yeah, it works. So just let me recall what Johanna already presented yesterday, which is this conceptual monitoring framework and the 4 building blocks, which consists of responses and action, more the enabling conditions for a circular economy, then what is really the core of a circular economy, the issues related to material life cycle and the value chain, then the interactions with the environment, and the 4th pillar, the socio-economic opportunities. So this is where we will have together now a little bit a look at what this actually means. So sorry for the long text, but this is how we defined this building block socio-economic opportunities for a just transition, as we call it here, in the guidelines. So for a just transition means actually that the substantial benefits are shared widely, so that everybody actually should be able to contribute from that. And we are saying it describes the social and economic outcomes of a circular economy, taking into account aspects of economic efficiency and social equity that are central to a just transition. And the indicators and indicator themes cover the new markets, trade and employment opportunities, changes in supply security or autonomy, levels of educations, skills development, behavioral changes, new developments, uptake of new circular business models, as well as distributional aspects of a circular economy, policies, and so on. So I think what we can see here in conclusion, these are very challenging issues, and we have heard already that several of them are really, even if they are relevant to measure, they are very difficult to measure. So there's lots of research in this area needed. So let's drill a little bit deeper. So these are the main themes and the indicator topics that were identified. This was basically work of the OECD expert group working on that. And I would like to thank them for this important work. So you see for market developments and new business models, it's the circular economy entrepreneurship, goods and services, business models, startups, industrial ecology and symbiosis initiatives, the employment markets and jobs, recycling markets, and so forth. Then trade developments, which is trade and circular economy related goods and services, supply security. And then, of course, there's this block about skills, awareness and behavior, about literacy, the public opinion on circular economy issues, which I think is a very important thing, because if circular economy was seen beneficial by the entire society, it would be a self-runner, right? But we still have to make policies. And the inclusiveness of the transition, which is also a very important aspect. So this is difficult to read, my apologies for this, but you can see it also in the publication. So this is actually the list of indicators for each of these themes. So you see the market developments and new business models. And this is more like an instruction how to read the indicator list. So for each indicator, there is 3 to 4, let's say 4 major information. So you see the indicator type, whether it's a core indicator, or another type of indicator, so a complementary indicator or contextual indicator, then the relevance, how we assessed it, if it's high, medium, or low, and then also the measurability, which means data availability, but also methodological soundness. Are there any methodologies available? And lastly, where can you already find this indicator? So we make here also reference to the monitoring framework in the European Union. So I just want to leave this as an example. For example, for the circular economy entrepreneurship, so the gross value added of circular economy sectors, percentage contribution to GDP and change over time is one of the selected core indicators, because it's relevant. Measurability is between high and low. It depends also how you define circular economy sectors, and so on. I don't want to go now through all the details. For me, this is more like to give an overview. What are the thematic areas and which core indicators have been defined so far, and where we see some issues. So for example, for employment, it's jobs in circular economy sector. Let's continue. Then for the trade developments, there are some complementary indicators, such as trade in secondary materials, trade in recycled materials, which is of course not so easy to measure. So these are things that could be relevant, but we need to have the sound methodologies to do so. Or supply security. Yeah, then we have the area of skills, awareness, and behavior. There we have several placeholders, knowing that's important or relevant to have this information, but also define it more as a research item to really continue working on this and also to learn from countries which experience they have in using or measuring these aspects. I would like to leave it here because the basic idea was really just to show what are the main indicator themes or the main themes we have to discuss. And the idea of this session is also now to see a little bit how EGSS, for example, can contribute to these important thematic areas. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. We will continue directly with the presentation from the title is Updating of Related Classification, means classification of ornamental purpose. Please, Isabel.
Thank you, Olivier. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I will give you an update on the classification of environmental purposes with a slight focus on the EGSS account, so environmental goods and services sector account. So if you remember the presentation from yesterday from Ilaria, she mentioned it as a classification that has been adopted at international level in the last UN Statistical Commission in end of February. To go back a little bit in time, so we have in EU 3 environmental accounts where we do use some classification that you may know. It was SEPA and CREMA, so one for protection, environmental protection, and one for resource management. So we have been using them in protection expenditure accounts, environmental goods and services, and environmental taxes. Those classifications we use are part of the SEEA central framework, and they are as well somehow in line with the SNA concept when it comes to apply it in some accounts. And more recently, we have in the new regulation at EU level, we will have as well an account on environmental subsidies and similar transfers, which will apply as well the same classification. So if we focus on environmental goods and services accounts, in EU, we are looking at some production activities of environmental products at national level. We are measuring some characteristics, output, exports, value added, employment. And behind this account, so we are using classifications, activity classifications based on ISIC at international level, so the UNECE for European countries. We do have environmental purposes classification, products classification as well. In EGSS, so the scope, how we define more precisely the scope is based on the indicative compendium. So we are listing basically activities and products that are related to environmental goods and services. So the classification that we have for some of our accounts will be the classification of environmental purposes. And this is a successor of the 2 classifications that are currently implemented in Europe and part for the SEPA of the SEEA central framework. So we have environmental protection activities classification and one for resource management activities. Some years ago, Eurostat had started a task force with some member states to update those 2 classifications because we have been using them for more than 5-10 years. So we had seen the need for an update. And the idea as well was to merge both classifications into one single comprehensive and that could help as well to integrate activities, environmental activities as a whole. This classification has been adopted end of February, and Eurostat will be the custodian agency for this classification. So what are the main features of the classification of environmental purposes? Though the scope of the classification remains to look at a subset of the economy, the boundaries are given by the SEEA Central Framework, in particular this chapter 4. Of course, with the new SEEA Central Framework, the SEP will be part, hopefully, in the update. So it will be introduced more precisely in the new Central Framework. So for now, it will be kind of an annex for the current SEEA Central Framework. What we look at with this classification is to classify 3 different things, so environmental activities, environmental products, as well as environmental expenditures. This classification can be seen as a multi-purpose classification because it could serve different environmental or climate uses, depending on what you are interested in. And with this adoption at the international level, now the classification has an international classification stamps, respecting as well the classification criteria that are implemented at international level. So the structure of the classification, we have 3 levels. The first one is division, then groups and classes. Of course, at national level, you can go even beyond that and add some additional level 4th or 5th level to deal with your, let's say, specificities. At the first level, though, the division are meant to be informative and clear about what we are looking at in terms of environmental domains. So we have air and climate, energy, wastewater, water resources, waste, material recovery and savings, soil, surface and groundwater, biodiversity and forest, noise and radiation, research and development, and cross-cutting and other environmental purposes. So except the 2 last ones, which are a little bit crossing all the 6 first divisions, each division is meant really to have a clear objective in terms of environmental activities and domain. Because it's a national classification, we have as well ensured some symmetry across categories details. If you would compare with the current classification, SEPA and CREMA, you would go at the second level of this new classification, and there you would have a perfect bridge between the previous classification and the new one. And we think that with this classification, we are able to accommodate some policy needs or user needs. So if you would look at climate change mitigation, you would have to go, of course, deeper than this division level you see here. But at some detailed level, you would be able to group back some of these classes or groups of the classification to define and delineate your policy area of climate change mitigation, for example. The classification comes with many pages of explanatory notes, so really defining what we include, what we exclude, some borderline cases, because at European level, what is important is to have something homogeneous, so treated the same way by all the EU countries. But still, you know, there could be, let's say, some marginal cases where you have to basically to decide where to put it. So that's the explanatory notes are quite developed. For now, this classification is available on the UNECE website through the documents that were discussed at the Statistical Commission, but Eurostat will publish it as well in the coming weeks, let's say 2 months maximum, on our website. So you will have, let's say, maybe more direct access to it. So if you focus now on environmental goods and services sectors, looking at the classification of environmental purposes, you can see here at the, let's say, the upper level of the classification, or the division level, what are the correspondence with the current SEPA and CREMA and what we apply in EGSS. So EGSS is currently in EU defined by this SEPA and CREMA categories that you have on your right. And here you have the link with the classification of environmental purposes where it belongs to. And you can see that here already, looking only at the division level is not enough to measure environmental good and services sector. You will need to go at least one step below, or sometimes even 2 steps below, to the lowest level of the class. We see the classification of environmental purposes really as the policy tool now. It's quite flexible to organize looking at some policy needs. So we did an exercise trying to map the current disclassification with climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, sustainable use and protection of water bodies, circular economy, pollution prevention and control, and biodiversity. And here it was possible to go from the classification of environmental purposes to those domains, keeping in mind that you have to go, of course, deep sometimes in the classification. And keeping in mind as well that the classification of environmental purposes is fully in line with the current central framework of the SEEA, and some activities are not part of the central framework. So, for example, for looking at the circular economy, here we had quite a very good match between the classification of environmental purposes and the circular economy. And we can, from this classification, extract what we need for the circular economy. Michael, I need some help. There are only 2 slides more. So. Yes, thank you. Yes, this one. Great, thank you. So here you have an example how to apply the classification for measuring circular economy. So you can see for each of the, let's say, the main activities in the circular economy: energy efficiency, water, waste, recovery, organic agriculture, soil protection, and public transport, how it corresponds to the SEP categories. So except when you do not have it in the SEEA central framework, so this is related to the public transport that is not part of the SEEA central framework. We have some part of it when it relates to like batteries or, let's say, vehicles, electric vehicles, but not the full public transport. So here you see that you can measure those part of the circular economy going at the 2nd level or the 3rd level of the classification. Here we have at EU level, we had a project to measure some estimates for output, value added, employment and investment, where we can see as well the link with the classification, and we could produce these activities and this account of circular economy. So how we intend to implement this new classification of environmental purposes? We are collecting environmental accounts because we have EU legislation. For that, we need to amend part of our legal act that relates to the SEPA and CREMA, let's say, uses that we have for different accounts, and this to transpose it with the new classification. For this, we have started to work on it, and we will have some legal work and consultation with our members of the working group at EU this year, in May and in October, to come for an adoption by the end of the year, and to have an act that will be implemented in 2025. Along this legal act, we have already set this list of activities and products for EGSS. So this indicative compendium I mentioned at the beginning, we have here defined already an updated list, and this is independent from the SEP, but will be available already this year. So with those two elements, we will be able to implement a new classification for the environmental goods and services in 25, as well for expenditure accounts and for subsidy and similar transfers. So the data will be implemented for 25 data collection, meaning results in 26. And with that, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. I know that it was really a challenge to develop this new classification. It was needed because we want to have more clear visibility to policymakers, but the challenge for statisticians is that we don't want to change every year our classification because we don't want to follow the willingness of the policymaker, but we make statistics and we want to keep our statistics in the time. So it was really challenging to keep the continuity with SEPA and CREMA, and I think we have reached this challenge, knowing also that, as you show it, to measure circular economy, we need to go at the more detailed level, the class level, and perhaps for some country it will be difficult to catch this this level of information. Thank you, Isabel. Now we will give the floor to Frédéric Norroy from INSEE, Statistical Institute of France. The title of the presentation is EGSS Data for Measuring Socio-Economic Aspect of the Circular Economy, Employment's Perspective. Frédéric.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. For the interpreters, I will give this presentation in French, just to let you know.
Alors, voilà, bah, écoutez, je suis très heureux.
I'm very pleased to be here with you to talk about the work conducted in France as to the use of EGSS data in measuring circular economy. This will be solely focused on employment, but in the future, we will be able to develop areas other than employment. Okay, I'm not sure that it's working.
Merci, thank you. Voilà, donc ce que je vais aborder là ce matin.
So what I'll be addressing this morning is the definition of the scope of the activities within the circular economy. And I'll discuss the approach that was developed in France with some of the results. And following that, I will address the relationship between the analytical framework of the EGSS and the circular economy. And there will be some assessment of the strengths and weaknesses of employment within this analytical framework. So on the definitions, I've highlighted 4 here. Thank you. So there are 4 definitions, 3 of which are used in France. So this is just to point out that even at a national level, there's not necessarily a convergence towards a single definition. And then I also listed the definition used by Eurostat. These definitions, nevertheless, are similar in terms of the use of goods and services and a minimization of the resources and, of course, the circularity of the economy. There may be some distinctions at a national level when we talk about maintaining the value of products throughout their life cycles. And I think that Joanna clarified this concept yesterday when she stated that it's not just the economic value, strictly speaking, that is taken into consideration, but also social and environmental aspects that are factored in. So there may be another problem, which would consist in looking at the resource and beyond the value of the resources, what environmental aspects we would include. For example, do we include biodiversity in the circular economy or certain climate aspects? Now, I come to the work that's being developed in France. We base ourselves on what we call the pillars of the ADEME, that's the Agency for Environmental Transition, the ADEME, as we call it, which has done a great amount of work on the circular economy. It's not a statistical institution, but they have produced a lot of analytical work and developed frameworks which are crucial for statistics. So there's a similar figure as the one you see here in the publication that was referred to yesterday, which was just published. And those are the guidelines for measuring the circular economy by the UNECE. So on page 40, you can see a similar illustration. It's figure 4. Now, there are 7 pillars that the ADEME identifies as, and you can see them around the circle here. The recycling pillar, the responsible consumption pillar, the extension of the life cycle, which includes the activities of repair and reuse. Now, this is the French framework. At an international level, and I've had a look at this, we tend to use a framework that focuses on purposes. There are 9 purposes according to this framework, such as recycling, repairing, repurposing, and so on. So there is quite some overlap between these 2 different analytical frameworks. And this one is a little bit more detailed, perhaps. The slide seems to be stuck again. Thank you. So the approach developed in France began fairly recently in 2016, with the first publications appearing in 2017, and now we have reviewed the scope or the perimeter of our activities several times. Now, I won't go through the entire background in detail. I'd just like to focus on the latest updates, which were published at the end of last year, and which are based on the following principles. First of all, we consider one single scope or perimeter, whereas when we started out, we had a single central perimeter and then adjacent perimeters of analysis with activities which had a positive impact on the circular economy, but the purpose of which was not primarily this circularity. So that's just to set out the framework. Michael talked about central indicators, including complementary indicators. So this is not a simple discussion. Do we adopt a simpler framework with one central scope, or do we make things more complex and also calculate adjacent or similar activities? So we analyzed that we should take one form of activity and its form rather than measuring its impact. Now, of course, it's difficult to make that distinction, but we nevertheless maintain this as a principle. So we considered that the purpose of the activities needed to be in line with one of the pillars of the ADEME, which I listed previously. As a consequence, we reduced the scope or perimeter which we had previously adopted by removing certain activities from the scope because their purpose was not centered on the circularity of the economy, even though some of their outcomes might lead to a circular economy. So we removed public transit, renewable energy, and energy control, or energy savings. And I think on the latter point, we might come back to that. Some of these exclusions might be a little bit contentious, but nevertheless, we developed a database with observations ranging from 2008 to 2021. And of the pillars of the ADEME, which I referred to earlier, We have 4 that are covered out of the total of 7. There are 3 with which we still have some difficulties. So here are the outcomes for 2021. Almost half of the job positions are within the reuse section. So we take in the repair and reuse activities into that sector. And then we look at sustainable supply with almost 200,000 jobs. And this would include agriculture, organic agriculture. Now I'll come to the way in which we can use the CES analytical framework to provide an analysis of employment in the circular economy. And I used in particular the new classification of environmental activities that Isabel just talked about, which was adopted as an international standard. On the circular economy, there are 3 divisions of this new classification which relate to the circular economy. So there is CEP 3, which relates to the management of water resources and wastewaters, which is completely included in the circular economy. CEP 4 relates to waste management, materials recovery, and recycling, and this is also included in our system, except for landfills and street cleaning. And then CEP 5 relates to various aspects, the protection of the surface and groundwaters, biodiversity, and forest management. And of these items within the circular economy, we only take soil management, soil remediation, and the management of water bodies. And this includes organic agriculture. So I've summarized this in this Venn diagram. On the left, you have the environmental activities, which we do not have in the circular economy. For example, air and climate, combating noise and radiation, and so on. On the right, you have elements in the circular economy which are not within environmental activities. So we have repair activities for products that are not considered environmental, the reuse of products such as the sale of secondhand goods, rentals, and then the incorporation of recycled materials in industrial products. And then in the center, we have the activities where we have the intersection, that is to say, where we have both factors. So I'll now list the sources which are used to estimate the employment in the circular economy. 30% of jobs come from environmental activities. Now, here we don't have one single source, rather we have a set of sources which themselves refer to primary sources. So we have the INSEE, which is the French National Statistics Office, and then the ADEME, which is the Agency for the Environmental Transition. We have the Agence Bio, which is for organic agriculture. Then we have the accounts of the activities for environmental protection, in particular the services, and then we have sources within the ministries. And then the remainder, that is to say 70% of jobs, here we use essentially the data from the INSEE, that is to say the National Statistics Office, and we use them in 2 ways. We use these data as a source directly, and this is data where we have employment that is observed within the NAS system. And we can use that directly when we consider that the entirety of that factor is included in the circular economy. For example, that's the case of repair or reuse activities. And the second type of use of this source is when we need to drill down a bit further, when we see that the NAS classification does not in fact suffice to assess what is at stake here. So for this purpose, we also use an UNECE source, which is survey-based and which provides us with an overview of the product. So that allows us to go much further into the data, but it doesn't give us employment, it just gives us turnover. And so we have to estimate the number of jobs with a ratio of labor intensity. Now, I won't go into the details of how we do this, but I'm happy to answer if you have questions. Now, I'll conclude with highlighting some strengths and weaknesses. If we base ourselves on the analytical framework of environmental activities, then, well, what is true is that we first developed the environmental accounts with the EGSS and so on. And at a later stage, we introduced circular economy related data. So it's of great interest to be able to use this framework of environmental activities, which includes a number of factors such as employment, production, foreign trade for some of the activities. And these are variables which are formatted in the format that is used for the national account, so they are comparable with other countries, and that is of great interest. Another type of use, and that is even for such activities that are not within the framework of environmental activities, for those we can nevertheless use some sources of data that refer to environmental activities. And we can also use certain methods within the environmental activities framework, in particular for estimating the number of jobs. So these are some of the synergies that we might expect once we have in place a framework for environmentally related activities. We can then use that framework to estimate employment or production in the circular economy. There are nevertheless some limits, and it is true that the greater the overlap between EGSS and the circular economy, the greater the added value will be. And it will be of interest to use that framework that was developed for environmental activities. And we saw earlier that 30% of employment were calculated on that basis of the environmental activities. So there has been a significant effort, but there's also much work that needs to be done outside of this framework of environmental activities. So there's a third point we should highlight, which is that the approach based on pillars of the ADEME, as well as the approach based on purposes of the ER, are approaches which are not very much in line with the general environmental classifications, whether this is the new CEP or the new SEPA CREMA classification. So there is some room left for interpretation when using these approaches. And then in terms of organization, there are some working groups on the circular economy or working groups on environmental activities, which are at times working separately. So it would be a good thing for information to be shared to a greater extent. But this task force is an excellent tool for that, because it allows us to bring these approaches together. And of course, it's impossible to participate in all working groups. So I'll end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frederick, for this very interesting presentation. We see that we still have some works to do at international level. I take for your presentation that you, in the French experience, you exclude some activity like public transport or energy efficiency. And I compare that with the presentation from Isabel just before, where we include public transport inside, and certainly in the room we have different situation depending the country. I hope that we could discuss that during the discussion session. Now we will continue with the presentation from Johanna Pakarinen from Statistics Finland. The title is Comparison of EGSS and Structural Business Statistics Data on Measuring Circular Economy.
Thank you, Chair. And while we wait for the presentation to show up, I want to thank France. It was really interesting presentation, and I think we have discovered some of the same issues and same kind of conclusions as you have. And regarding the information sharing, I think we noticed in the task force, or noted as well, that actually this seminar that we are currently attending is one big platform for information sharing as well. So I think it's, I'm really happy to see that it is working and we are getting these synergies here as well. But so then onwards to my presentation. And first of all, I would like to thank my colleagues, Nina Hilton and Nico Olsson, who have helped me greatly in preparing this presentation, but unfortunately they couldn't attend in person, so I will do this presentation on behalf of all of us. Nina is the person working with our X accounts, and Nico is responsible for our circular economy indicators. So if later on you want to ask something more, you can also contact them directly with some questions. So we have been doing these circular economy business indicators in Finland for some time now. And here is a graph that looks quite familiar, I think, for many of you, because it's really, really close to many of the circular economy definitions that you have seen here already. And as we have noted, defining is really essential for measuring. And what we have done here is that we have taken the existing definitions for circular economy, and we have actually then applied it to this business mindset. So this is specifically this circle that you see here is something that is from the circular economy business side of things. And we did spend quite a lot of time in discussing this and thinking what would be sort of the pivotal aspects of a product or service life cycle to be able to measure what kind of businesses do we have and how are they doing in the circular economy. We ended up with these 8 activities. So we have, from the beginning, we have design, then we have material extraction, production, logistics, trade and services, consumption, waste, and reuse and recycling. And for these 8 activities, we have in our indicator set, we have a total of 18 indicators. And for the topic that we are discussing now, which is the socioeconomic part, we are now especially focusing on the number 3, which is the industry structure. But we also did find some more indicators, such as pay level and education, that we cannot measure with SEEA, but are also, in our opinion, quite important for the sort of socioeconomic aspect as well. But so why are we producing this indicator set? It was actually based on this assignment that we got from our environmental institute. They had this EU LIFE project, really big one. It lasted, I think, for 8 years. And as a part of that project, they wanted to measure also the enterprises that are active in the circular economy. So as a part of that assignment, we produced the first set of indicators in 2020. And since then, we have updated it twice and also added a few indicators compared to the first version. And these indicators are based on statistical data that we already have in our statistics. So there was no new data collections done for this indicator set. And that's why we have been able to do time series from around 2010 onwards. So it was also one of the strengths of choosing this approach. Instead of, for example, asking from companies, how are you doing, or are you doing circular economy? And here is a graph from our industry structure indicator. So as you can see, there is the number of personnel in the circular economy establishments. We have the number of establishments, and we have the turnover in million euros. And this is something that is produced currently based on the structural business statistics. So we are not using SEEA statistics for this at the moment. And for this definition, for the SBS, we are using the Eurostat list of industries, almost as is. During our project, we actually discussed this and also decided to add the category of other circular economy industries, which includes renting and leasing activities as well, but otherwise it is the same as the industry list used in the Eurostat indicator set. And based on this industry classification, we then select the activities that we calculate in the circular economy indicator. But it's really difficult to measure all activities in the circular economy because there is, for example, in services, there is a lot of activities that are also part of circular economy, but they are not really distinguishable based on the NACE codes. But we do have really good establishment specific information. So we have local kind of activity units in our business registers, which enables us to take, for example, parts of enterprises that are involved in circular economy from the big companies. So if we think about why did we choose the structural business statistics compared to SEEA accounts, we have, as said, the excellent data coverage and really detailed data on establishment level. It covers quite well the value chains. And one thing that is really big thing for us in Finland is that there is the possibility to do regional data because we have the local kinds of activity units. Because for the SEEA statistics, we only have national level data. And our user and policymakers really would like to see more regional dissemination. And then as a negative side, the classification is really a good starting point, but we are still missing a lot of the circular economy activity. So then, for this seminar, we did this exercise to think how would we do the circular economy business indicators if we were to switch from the SBS to using X statistics. And this is something that we did also think that would be maybe useful to consider in the future, because of course we would want to use the environmental accounts if possible. And so this is not something that we do day to day. This is just an exercise that was calculated for this presentation. And for background information for the X in Finland, we actually calculated based on the national accounts. So we don't have any data collection for X. We use it from take the data from the production accounts and input-output tables and so on in national accounts. So to calculate the circular economy, we took the following categories from the SEPA and CREMA classifications that we considered to be relatable in the circular economy business. So from SEPA, we have the classes 2, 3, and 7. And here you can see also then the kinds of activities that we then put them to. So for example, the SEPA 2 is included in NACE 22. And then SEPA 3 is in the 38 classes, so in waste collection and waste treatment, and so on. And then on the right side, there's also CREMA classes that are mostly related to the natural resources. So here is the comparison of the industries in circular economy and the products as well that we have in the X and then what we are using from the SBS. So in the X, you can see that there are both industries and also products, while in the circular economy business indicators from SBS, we have just the industries that are 100% included in the circular economy. And you can also notice that the recycling is included in both of these, while then the repair and reuse and renting and leasing are not in the scope of X. And here is a calculation of the circular economy output and value added and exports based on the X data. And as already mentioned, we do X based on the shares from the national accounts data. So we use these estimates for value-added exports and staff years. So these actually do go quite well in line than how the actual national economy and the industries there develop. And here is the data then disseminated by UNECE classification, because it is the same one that we are using currently in our circular economy indicators, and it is also something that I think our users appreciate. And from this comparison, we can see that based on the X data, the largest industry by far is 24, which is the manufacturing of metals, and this is due to the high volume of recycled metals, which is in CREMA 14. And then the second largest industry is the UNECE 38, which is the waste collection, treatment, and materials recovery. And in SEPA 3, there is only waste collection and management, so it explains quite a lot of this information. And then here is just a similar comparison in the staff years, so the employment parts. So we have just used a similar kind of process to do this dissemination. So just as I think my concluding slide is the differences between the X and SBS data, which are the sort of the most important ones when we are deciding on what are we using and what are we not using for our indicators at the moment. So for the X, which is for us based on the national accounts, the shares are estimated for X using expert assessment, internal statistics, information requests from different parties and websites. So then for this reason, we don't have really that detailed data available. We also, for X, we don't have any regional data, but we do have the high consistency with national accounts, which is definitely a plus on this side. And for the SBS data, we have really good data coverage, and of course the data is in local kind of activity unit level, which then enables us to do regional data. And also one part that actually isn't mentioned here, but it's also quite important, is the timeliness, because often the business statistics are available quite well beforehand, so they are also available faster than the X data. And one thing I can also still mention about the comparison that we did about the numbers is that when we compared the levels of output or value added, we did end up in quite similar scale in euros, but when we then compared what we actually include in both of them, I think it might be just sort of coincidence, because they are not actually based on the classification really covering at the moment the same sort of activities. There is some overlap, but there are then some things that you can measure with SBS that you don't get from X, and vice versa. So I think this was all for my comparison today. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna, for this nice presentation. I see that you try to find a solution faced to the problems at UNECE. It's not detailed enough, and you use SBS data sources to do that, but also with the challenge that by this way you can lose the consistency with national accountant. I know that it could be difficulties also. So I hope you enjoy this full presentation. Now we will open the floor for the discussion session. So if you have questions, comments, please raise your flag. And I see North Macedonia, please.
Presentations. I have questions. One question regarding the classification, new classification of environmental purposes. Does it mean that in the reporting questionnaire, these categories or groups, classes of SEPA and CREMA will be changed? And if so, do we need to revise data for the previous reporting years? Thank you.
Isabel? Yeah, directly. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you for your question. In terms of reporting, yes, the questionnaire will be changed. So the reporting for 25 will be changed according to the new classification. So basically, currently, we have some categories of the SEPA CREMA that will be replaced by some categories of the classification. We have a first proposal of which slices, which part of the classification will be there. So we don't know yet exactly. I cannot tell you today if, let's say, it will be the first level, the second level, part of the first level, second level. Okay, there will be some mix there to try really to ensure the bridge with the current data that we have in SEPA CREMA, because of course, we are still willing to keep as many data points in terms of time series as possible. But in terms of data reporting, as the data reporting in the new classification will already start next year, so we cannot have back data as a request. So parts of EGSS, you have 3 years to submit. So it means that you will have 3 years to submit with the new classification, but not more than that. And we hope that because of the bridge that we have, and we will try to keep somehow a detail of the classification that allows us to bridge with the current data, that we can provide some consolidation time series to the users. So I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. I give the floor to United States, Julie.
Thank you. I have one question for Finland, and a second question goes to France. First, to Finland, we don't have that much experience with collecting information about rentals. I was thinking about vehicle rentals. For the most part, Hertz and Avis, the big car rental companies, we can find in our business statistics. But what about car collectives? Where do they end up in our UNECE categories? Can we find them? Because I think that's going to be something coming, especially in cities. So, and to France, on your slide number 5, you specifically said that you are using main purpose as your criteria and not impacts. And that is what the SEEA Central Framework says. And I'd just like you to, if you can, explain a little bit more that decision, because this is an important topic, especially for tomorrow. And it was one that Olivier brought up as well, that what do we do with public transportation and now Eurostat's proposal for climate change mitigation investments to include all of rail transport? The assumption is that public transportation should all go in. We haven't done that for environmental protection expenditure. And I wonder, we'll have a day tomorrow to talk about mitigation expenditures, but it comes up there as well. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a very, very good question about the car collectives. And I have to say, I am not sure on what is the sectoral classification. That would be maybe the SBS colleagues that would be more aware of that. But I know that sharing economy in itself has been a struggle for us. And I think it's a struggle to sort of capture from any kind of statistics that we have. I think the problem goes to all the flows that go from household to household many times, because I think often you will have maybe some kind of app or something and you get some fees or something from there, but it doesn't really describe the value of the actual service, for example. So I think also, for example, flea market trade, which is really crucial for a circular economy, is something that might happen in Facebook or something, and it's never captured anywhere in the official statistics. And for these, actually, we have had in Finland this one survey that was directed to consumers, and they would ask all these sharing economy questions, and that was really informative. But unfortunately, that is something that it's not done on regular basis. But I'm not sure if we have any good solutions yet on how could we get that information year by year, like continuously.
Michael, I continue in French. Yes, thank you. Merci pour.
Thank you for the question about the impact and the main purpose of the activity. In the early work conducted in France, which had given rise to some publications in 2017, we had considered a broad perimeter for the circular economy. But we had two sub-perimeters. One which was at the very heart, at the very core of the circular economy, and a broadened perimeter to related activities, which had a positive impact, but weren't the main purpose. Bearing in mind the other work done, and also given the fact that we've benefited from contributions from national working groups, we had decided to restrict the perimeter and to get as close as possible to the main purpose. Even though it's not always easy to draw a distinction here in terms of the impact, particularly when it comes to repair activities. There we could say that the extension of the use of products does tie in with the impact. I think your question was mainly about the three activities that we had set aside, namely public transport. For public transport, we had considered that the main purpose was really focused on combating climate change rather than the circular economy. And also in terms of the gains from the extraction of resources, even though there is a positive impact. Now, on energy efficiency, I think we would need to discuss this in further detail. We felt that also there is a positive impact here, but there isn't a main purpose in terms of circularity of the economy. It isn't direct in any case. Now, the main purpose of these activities really honed in on the mitigation of climate change. These are things that, of course, are being discussed, particularly in terms of controlling energy and resource gains and savings, which are expected from these activities. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Thank you, Frederick. First, United Kingdom.
Yes, thank you for those really interesting presentations. It was a question for Finland. I noticed, I think, going from 2020 to 2021, and again going from 2021 to 2022, fairly large increases in I think it was output and gross value added for circular economy activities. I just wondered if there was any reason for that. Might be quite interesting to hear. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I have to say that we discussed it, and there was no really one particular reason for it. I think one thing is that the metal prices affect quite a lot in the calculations. So that is industry that can fluctuate quite a bit. And we also did consider that if there might have been some changes on how the companies actually, what do they consider as recycled metal, for example. So that might be something, if we were to calculate based on this, we would, or if we would publish these figures as our circular economy indicator, we would definitely take a closer look at this. Because I think there was at least, at one point, there was a change in the customs filing for recycled metals. So there was some new sort of how do you say, case on that. So it might be due to that and also maybe the changes after the COVID. So, but for one particular reason, I don't really have any perfect answer.
UNEP, please.
Thank you for these presentations and good morning, everyone. My comment will be to Isabel's presentation. And I would like to provide one more example to the slide about mapping this classification to different purposes, let's say, or areas. And in this case, I would like to add SDG reporting, in particular SDG indicator 1771, which is about investments and environmentally sound technologies. I would like to say that, UNEP is a custodian agency for this quite complicated indicator, and countries have a lot of issues with calculation of this indicator. So we really try our best, and this year we're planning to start development of methodologies that support countries in calculating this indicator from a statistical perspective. And our solution is to link this indicator to their environmental goods and services sectors, and in particular this account. So we already thought a lot and had a very nice discussion, by the way, yesterday with Eurostat. So definitely we see this environmental goods and services account as a quite good way from a statistical perspective to support this indicator. And of course, with the support of this classification of environmental purposes, in the future we can go deeper. So yeah, I think it's one more important area where we can use these classifications, and congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you for this comment. I will continue with Italy.
Yes, I would like to congratulate as well with Eurostat and with France and Finland as well for the effort for identifying circular economy activities within national accounts, basically. And as user, I congratulate because as researcher in institution that supports the supports policymakers, this data will be very important. I'm also wondering whether a formal statement by the task force on the UNECE task force on measuring circular economy could help Eurostat in the legal process for having approved this classification.
Thank you, Italy. I think there is no doubt now the classification is adopted. This is written in the conclusion of the Statistical Commission. So, you know, we kept the document, we have it. So now at EU level, it's a question of implementing it. And this, we are working on it this year to have it implemented next year. So we will have a round of discussion with our working group members, so the EU countries, in May and in October, but the classification is there. And I guess for the SEEA standard framework, okay, we may have, I don't know, maybe, let's say an annex currently until the new central framework is adopted to indicate that now we are referring to this new classification. So this, I think we will see with the technical committee of the SEEA standard framework. Thank you.
Okay, on my list I have Estonia, Sweden, Mexico, and Exeter University. Also, I close the list now. I ask you to be short. Thank you. Estonia.
Yeah, thank you. So my question also goes to Isabel about new SEP, and and I think we do not talk about, do not get your kind of introduction to the SEP tomorrow when I talk about the climate change policy area and suitability of current statistics for producing relevant figures. I ask this question in this this session of circular economy. So it's from a policy perspective, probably also in circular economy domain, there are goods and services which are out of the scope of current SEP. And we know that for climate change, for sure that they are, and Julia already pointed out one of the aspects, one of the issues. So there are the products and services which are out of the scope of a SEP. So now the question, like, so in addition to the public sector aspect issue, there is activities, there is a renewable energy related energy crop for electricity and heat. So there is a list, and it's already known for experts as well. So what is a plan of Eurostat currently? How to bring in these issues? Do you have a plan now to bring them in? And how is the question? If yes, would you do you plan to extend the indicative compendium of products and services? So is this what you are aiming at, and how? Yeah. Thank you.
Colleague Isabel is forwarding the question to me. So I think what we want to do about this in the next years is first to have a discussion, a technical discussion to confirm that this mapping that the Eurostat and the UN Task Force did of the SEP classification with certain policy areas, that technically we are not forgetting anything, because we did this very quickly in a few months, and I cannot exclude that another discussion highlights that something important was forgotten. So we need to have that discussion. And a second aspect that I think we need to develop at technical level with colleagues, technical colleagues, is there are certain cases in which the mapping is imperfect. So one category of the SEP does not want to one category of circular economy, but a part of it. And we need to discuss more about how this part of it. What does it mean if we are going to need coefficients? If these coefficients can be the same for all the countries or not, they are going to be very different. If we can have pilot studies in some countries that produce the coefficients and that all the countries can use or not, this is to be seen. And then finally, the question, the final element of the question is whether we can collect these new policy areas with the EGSS questionnaire, and whether we are going to modify, you ask whether we are going to modify the indicative compendium. I think this is something we can do in the future, but it will be outside the EU legislation that we have. So it will be on a voluntary basis, what we call in the EU jargon, voluntary basis, voluntary reporting. We can add extra sheets in the EGSS questionnaire for circular economy, for some other topics, but probably they will be on voluntary basis. Until we have a mandate to do it with a regulation. We would need a new regulation to do that we don't have now in the European Union. So it would be like a voluntary extension of the EGSS. I think technically it's a good idea, but it will not have a voluntary, a legal basis for the European Union countries for some years, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Arturo. I give the floor directly to Mexico.
Thank you again for the opportunity to ask. It's very brief. Checking the paper from France and Finland, not very impressive in detail. I checking that in general terms, they said that it's possible to using environmental goods and services for issuing the 30% of the circular economy, and another 70% could be across the business structural statistics. So my question is, it's possible today to think in a standard statistics for measuring circular economy or not? Thank you.
Please, could you just repeat the last part? Standard commission?
Today, is it possible to bounce on a standard statistical pour circular economy? Vous pensez que si?
Je crois que ça serait souhaitable.
I think it would be desirable to have common principles to look at what we should include by way of content of activities in this circular economy. Work has been undertaken by Eurostat nationally, and I think, indeed, we do need to reach out in terms of our work. We need to do away with differences and have a common core, if you will, even though the methodology used for estimates will lead to differences, but should in fact be minimized compared to those that are brought about because of having a different perimeter. Now, I don't know on what basis this would take place, but I do think it's an interesting avenue to explore.
I'm just going to be really brief so we can have a little coffee break as well. But I do think we are working on all together on trying to make a common understanding of this. And I think the guidelines that my colleague already mentioned again for this are a good starting point, because for that definition and framework, we have a really broad consensus already between all the countries and organizations. And we are, as has been mentioned, starting to work on the part B, which is I think we already have an idea on what we want to measure. The problem is that we don't have the tool set or the data to measure it. And for the part B, we are focusing on also more concrete guidelines and practical examples. So I think that could help as well in reaching this. So also, I think now we can take a break and you can all take your own copy of the manual or guidelines and maybe read it. Yeah.
Exeter University, you have 30 seconds.
I will be quick. Thank you all for your presentations. My question is directed to Johanna. For the structural business survey data you presented, you mentioned it's possible to capture values for enterprises where only part of their activities are aligning with the circular economy. I'm imagining here a retailer who offers a repair service as a small part of their business. And I will need to check this, but my understanding is that in the UK, the norm is for firms to respond to business surveys issued by the NSO on behalf of their primary activity in most cases. Can you provide any further information on whether an additional survey is used in your case, or how you are capturing, making this possible? Many thanks.
Thank you. I'm actually, I think this is more referring to actually in the industries than in the service sector. So the big parts actually are, for example, big industrial complexes that do, for example, recycling as part of one of their activity, and that's large enough to be classified as its own local kind of activity unit. So that is actually captured then in the surveys that we do for the structural business statistics. But for this, for example, small repair activities, those are lost in the service sector. So for that, we don't have information.
Thank you for this fruitful session, and I close it now. Give the floor to Joanna.
Thank you, and thank you all presenters and chair. This was a really interesting session, and now we have until 11:05 for quick coffee break. So I think maybe the first two will get to use the coffee machines if you are fast.
Were there how many countries
There is actually a list.
Okay.
I think it's in the acknowledgement list. I think they should be included. Everyone that has been here. Here you can see everyone.
Okay.
Yeah. So here's the case examples.
France?
Yeah.
But no, but
I think probably it's here in. Let's see. There are the national case examples.
but maybe in C.
Here. Here's the monitoring framework.
France. Okay. Yeah, but yeah, it is the works that were.
Where's the finish? You're not Finland anymore.
Yeah, no, I didn't have now because it's so fast. I didn't have time to take it up before closing the session. I will run to the toilet.
Yeah.
Hi, Michael. Nice to meet you. Yeah.
Okay,
Good to see you.
I have to digest and prepare
And if you want
Okay, welcome back from the coffee break. And we must move on to our next session, which is also a very interesting one. So please do join us, and hopefully everyone will manage back. Hopefully.
Use the lunch break for this information.
Okay, so our next session is the subsession 2D, which is measuring flows of biomass and bio-based materials in circular economy. And I'm really pleased to introduce our chair for this session, who is Professor Peter Hopkinson from the University of Exeter. So go ahead, Peter.
Is that good? Great. Okay, thanks, Johanna. So this session is about the biological in the circular economy, and got two speakers. We're missing Florian. Okay, maybe he's just getting a coffee and on his way back. Okay. But what we're presenting today is the role of the biological, the role of biomass, and the principles of those within a circular economy. And what we want to show is the importance of distinguishing and differentiating the biological and the technical in the circular economy. And I'm going to have a short presentation just to set the scene, and then I'm going to hand over to my speakers. We've got a country example from Costa Rica and from the Netherlands, and then Florian is going to talk about the work of the European Commission in this area. So I come here with some trepidation that I am not a statistician. I know that's a shock to some people, but I'm a professor of circular economy. And when I met Michael and explained some of the work that we were doing in the UK around a UK circular economy data observatory, he was interested in what we were doing and asked whether we would give an academic research practitioner perspective on the biological in the circular economy. So I've got three things to do. I've got to control a clicker.
Okay, wait, let me show you.
I've got to chair the panel, and I've got to keep to time. So just a little bit about the work that we do. So I lead a national research program called the National Interdisciplinary Circular Economy Research Program, funded by UK government and the Research Council over 4 years. It's to coordinate the work of 5 national centres, each of which is leading a strategic resource flow for the UK to accelerate the transition to a circular economy. Those 5 centres are textiles, construction, minerals, metals, technology metals, and chemicals, and the biological fits into at least 2 of those centres, but our work is broader than that. We also act as the UK focal point for the UN Circular Step, and recently, thanks to the Government Department of the Environment, we were part of an approved UN Centre of Excellence for the circular economy. And as part of that, the measurement and the measurement of the circular economy is absolutely fundamental. So together with my colleagues over on the table over there, we've been leading a global masterclass for the past 10 years for the Ellen MacArthur Foundation on the adoption and the implementation of the circular economy into practical reality. And the question we get asked most often is, how do you measure the circular economy? So I'm just going to give a little bit of a reflection today. I'm going to give a perspective on what we refer to as the biosphere. We're going to have a quick discussion. Discussion about the key debates and the challenges that we experience when we meet people in industry, when we meet people in the UK policy arena about the biological and the biosphere. And there's going to be a quick summary of what I think are some of the key requirements of the circular economy in the biosphere. So just if you were here yesterday for Marcus's talk when he introduced the butterfly diagram, this is a variant of the butterfly diagram, just turned 90 degrees to the left. The biospheric part of the circular economy is on the bottom, and the technical sphere is on the top. So the key point to this, I'm going right back to the start of circular economy. is that a key principle is everything is a resource for something else. And I want to explain why that is so important for this discussion about the biological and the biosphere. So how do we ensure in the measurement system or in industry application that everything is a resource for something else, and what happens if it isn't and it doesn't? So those who've been around the circular economy for a long time will recognize this, this graphic. It comes from cradle to cradle design thinking, the work of Michael Braungart and others. The two wings of the butterfly diagram that were presented yesterday, we refer to as the biosphere and the technosphere. And within that, there are two types of products. This is really the key point of today's my presentation. Products of consumption and products of service, okay? And we're talking about the biological and biomass. So products of consumption are designed for the biosphere. You have to design products of consumption for the biosphere, and if you don't, you run into all sorts of challenges. Those products are consumed, they're metabolized, and they cascade through various stages and across value chains to return safely to the biosphere. And one of the problems we've got in the linear economy is that is far from the truth. And the most important thing what that means is they have to be designed at the outset. Products and materials have to be designed at the outset to be healthy and high quality at every stage and kept free from contamination. So that's important when we start to come to think about recycling. Products of service, on the other hand, are designed to be durable and to be maintained at their highest utility and their highest value for the longest time. So there's a big difference between the two. So what does that mean? It means that material quality and health are fundamental to the circular economy, and they represent a serious system design challenge for the reasons explained on this graphic. The large part of what we're dealing with today is a legacy linear system, and we have to start with waste. And once we start with waste that hasn't been, materials and products that haven't been designed for the circular economy, you know, we know, and we've heard about it over the yesterday and today, that introduces all sorts of challenges and problems. For the future, as we look forward for the design of future circular economy systems, we have to look at upcycling. We don't look at recycling. So we have to start with designing products and materials as resources for something else. And if we don't, then we run into these problems. So clean resources for future use. And this final slide, before I just talk about some of the challenges we experience in our work, is that a lot of what we're trying to do in the biosphere and in the biological is to grasp the opportunity to increase the positive impact and the positive footprint of what I think it was Chris Reed from Australia yesterday referred to as nature positive. We don't just want to be reducing the impact. We don't just want to be introducing more recycling. We want to increase the amount of natural capital. We want to increase the amount of value from ecosystem services. We want to increase biodiversity. So whilst reducing the amount of harm we're doing at the moment from the linear system is important, we have to deal with that. We should now be looking forward to upcycling and creating new systems that are more effective than the current linear system. So let's have a quick look at some of the challenges that we experience. The first one, how do we ensure and enable continuous flows of biological nutrients into the biosphere? Well, the first thing we have to do is to follow the principle of the circular economy. That's an economy that's restorative and regenerative by intent. So in this example, on the left-hand side, agricultural systems, for example, need to maintain and improve soil health. They need to eliminate toxicity, and they need to maximize biodiversity and the health of all species. We also need to be careful in the biosphere be careful to avoid introducing bio-based products with misleading claims about compostability and biodegradability, as these impact the ability to, they impact on composting systems, domestic and industrial composting systems, and they impact on recycling systems. They also damage consumer confidence in the concept of circularity at the outset. Agenda 2 is that we're seeing increasingly biological materials being introduced into products of service, in particular bioplastics. So the demand for bioeconomy materials risks reproducing the same mistakes of the linear economy. They are not free of impact. They take land, they impact on food systems, and they impact on ecosystem services. On the right-hand side is an example of how bio-based feedstocks often become locked into complex mixed products, which are difficult to recover and to return to the biosphere. So rubber tires being a classic example containing a mix of bio-based materials and technical materials. What do we do with them at the end of their life is really difficult and an expensive problem. And we're seeing more of that as biomaterials are being introduced. The third agenda is that the products of consumption and products of service leak into the biosphere. You know this, I know this. So we're seeing significant post-use leakage of consumption and products of service, degrading natural feedstocks, ocean plastics being the classic example. We're also seeing a proliferation of substances of concern, for example, forever chemicals into everyday products, and the risk of recirculating toxicity and unidentified chemicals with health effects far below current regulatory standards. The graph on the right is a piece of work that we completed last year on the health effects of phthalates in recycled plastics, where the health effects are found at well below current statutory standards for safety. And one of the challenges in the circular economy when we adopt a recycling mentality is that we're at risk of accumulating those toxic chemicals that are very, very difficult to design out and have unknown health effects. The last example is, there was a bit of talk about this yesterday. I'm sure there'll be more talk about this tomorrow, about the role of the biological as carbon sinks and sources. There's increasingly scientific concern and systemic challenges about offsets. Many of you will know about this, leading many organizations to start to question whether offsetting is the right solution to addressing climate change and net zero, rather than reducing emissions at source. This example on the left-hand side is the University of California that has removed all carbon offsets in its net zero strategy. And then finally, the challenge of creation of so-called green and sustainable energy sources. They're rarely low carbon. They can be lower carbon than fossil fuel, but they often have high impact on bio-based feedstocks. The slide on the right is an example here in the UK of the deforestation of old growth Canadian timber, which is being used to create wood pellets for the UK's largest wood-fired power station, which is clearly not zero carbon or even low carbon. So just to summarize, last two slides, that Marcus yesterday talked about the importance of sinks and sources, and this final slide is, this last slide is trying to summarize what I've just described, is that we have to make sure that in the measurement systems and the measurement frameworks that we capture the interaction between the biosphere and the technosphere, because there are a number of clearly significant interactions and tough sink and source challenges. In the top left-hand corner, and I think we'll be talking about this later today, what we need to do is make sure we design sustainable regenerative cycles in the biosphere. What we have to avoid is that the two red quadrants, we have to avoid the risk of locking up feedstock and the degradation and loss of regenerative capacity. And on the bottom left, we have to avoid the risk of feedstock degradation and pollution. So what do I conclude from the work we've been doing over the past 12 years, and how does it relate to the work of SEEA? Well, firstly, we have to keep the biospheric and the technospheric in a circular economy as distinct. They're highly connected, but they have different implications for system design, for business models, for reverse logistics and for actions and responses. So we need more case studies to show what that means in practice. We need, in my opinion, much greater focus on the stocks of materials and their health and quality, as we do in terms of quality as quantity of circular flows. We need as much effort and measurement towards increased upcycling and biological cascades as to waste and recycling. So when we have these metrics, we need to make sure that we're measuring the right thing for the future. We need to ensure that we overcome the great confusion and inconsistency and lack of understanding of key terms such as biodegradability, compostability, biomaterials, bioplastic. It's extremely complex and confuses many people, and it increases the potential to do the wrong thing. Substituting fossil fuel feedstocks with biological feedstocks is not in itself a circular economy, in my opinion, and runs the risk of creating future linear bioeconomy. And finally, why I came over here and was delighted to take up the invite from Michael is that I think the guidelines that are produced are an absolutely brilliant, essential step in ensuring these agendas and debates are reflected in management systems at national level, at meso level, and the micro level, which is where we tend to operate. Because without them, we won't be shaping effective future circular economy circular bioeconomy. So thank you for that. That's my take on it. Just to throw out a challenge to the three speakers. I hope they're going to be able to answer all the questions that I've raised through those challenges. And I'm going to start with Florian, who knew that I was going to sort of throw down some challenges. So over to you, Florian, to come up with the answers.
Give me 1 second. Perfect. No problem. Thanks very much, Peter, for raising all these questions. I'm not sure I have very many good answers to that. I have a few questions myself, so maybe we can collect questions. And while the slides are being put up, let me just also say that this is a very timely discussion, because I think it's fair to say that we are at the very early stage on the EU policymaking side to hopefully get this right and to hopefully identify, but then also address accordingly these trade-offs that Peter mentioned. So what I'm trying to say is effectively that we won't have many answers, but many questions on what it is or what it could be to have a sustainable and circular bioeconomy in the EU. Just maybe a little bit, this is also quite important, because the work actually on the EU side is currently not led by a DG Environment that I represent, but it's by Research and Innovation that looked into the bioeconomy. And we are now trying effectively to join forces and make this bioeconomy sustainable and circular. And so the bioeconomy as such, actually the definition of it, encompasses all sectors and associated services and investments that produce, use, process, distribute, or consume biological resources, including ecosystem services. So by that definition, it captures quite a lot, and quite a lot of heterogeneous sectors and activities. Basically, by these, when you just look at the figures, it represents around 5% of EU's GDP and employs a bit more than 8% of its workforce. There are also a few additional figures that I put here on the slides that you can look at. But basically, the way we're trying to capture it is not just, again, and it relates a little bit to my presentation also yesterday on the circular economy as such, is not just an environmental or not just an economic and environmental, but also a social perspective onto it. And how the EU defined it so far is basically that there are 5 objectives, which are on the right-hand part of the slide. It's to ensure food and nutrient security, to manage natural resources sustainably, and that's, of course, a key element for us to look into in greater detail. But it's also to reduce dependencies of non-renewables, to mitigate climate change, but also on the economic side to strengthen European competitiveness and create jobs. And I will not go into the details, but just to say that this is not basically a starting, we're not at a starting point as such on the bioeconomy. Actually, it started already in 2012. In between that circle is the European Green Deal, which is the also slide I showed yesterday. But what I want to get basically your focus on is this 2023 European Council conclusions. So the European Council is the heads of states and governments of the EU member states, including also the President of the European Commission and the President of the European Parliament. And what they have decided in their conclusions of March 2023 is to look into what the European Union should look forward to and prioritize over the next 5 years. And one of the key priorities is the circular economy, which is great. And as part of that circular economy priority, it's also that including by seizing the opportunities offered by the bioeconomy. And that's key because that puts the bioeconomy as part of the circular economy. And therefore, we have to understand how to integrate the current bioeconomy approach with circularity. So this is something, what I meant with a starting point. So we're starting to look into this now. But this is very much what we will try to get our heads around in the next years. So the way at the moment in the EU, the bioeconomy is monitored. There's a monitoring system already in place since 2020 to look into progress. I think the interesting approach conceptually here is that it doesn't start from the point kind of what data is available, and then we build a monitoring framework around it. There are many monitoring frameworks in the EU, and this is one of them. We're very good in creating monitoring frameworks. But the interesting part is it's not a data-driven approach or a data-centered approach. It's more a conceptual approach, meaning that there are many indicators that basically are identified as potentially being useful to monitor the bioeconomy, but for which no data is yet or may never be available. So it's an interesting approach. Just show you in this slide how it looks like. I mean, there are over 200 indicators. And as you see, some of these indicators are filled because you see the data, you see where it comes from, you see the trends, but there are also gaps, so land footprint in the EU of EU consumption, for instance, but many others as well. And that's interesting because it provides maybe you of an kind of information what from a broader perspective would be useful to fill in. Maybe some of these gaps could be filled, I don't know, but that's maybe for you also in a way to look into what is possible actually, what can the SEEA and existing indicators provide here. And then maybe a little bit on the policy side. So on bio-based materials, I mean, we have actually a policy framework developed under this Commission's mandate on bio-based, biodegradable, and compostable plastics. And indeed, I very much share what Peter said on the potential trade-offs. And on the bio-based plastics, what's called here RED 3, which is the Renewable Energy Directive, the third review basically of the Renewable Energy Directive. There are quite a lot of criteria on what these materials and plastics have to fulfill in order to be called sustainable. However, on many of the underlying trade-offs, including some land use change that Peter mentioned, there is information, but it's not very clear basically for which kind of plastics necessarily this leads to an improved environmental outcome. The same on biodegradables or also compostable. There are probably specific examples that I could bring forward to say this is a clear winner, but just to say that on the trade-offs between these different spheres, and that's actually also potential for the SEEA to come in, it's not at all clear, and it's not at all easy to monitor, especially if some of the trade-offs are born outside Europe. Maybe just a kind of a little anecdote on biodegradable. Indeed, I mean, that's also part of the Green Claims initiative of the EU to look into what is it actually biodegradable. But even if it is, when you talk to recyclers, and I'm talking about big recycling facilities that are state of the art, what they tell me is everything that goes beyond 3 months in time in order to be biodegraded actually is incinerated, because they don't have the capacity nor the time to wait more than 3 months, because then it's no longer economically viable. So while plastics might be biodegradable, within a longer time frame, it's not done in practice because there's simply not enough time to make it economically viable. An interesting element as well on packaging, and it's mainly related to bio-based plastic packaging. The packaging and packaging waste regulation was finally approved last week, which is great news. And as part of that new regulation, there's a review clause where the Commission needs to look into the technological development and environmental performance of bio-based plastic packaging, and taking into account the sustainability criteria of the Renewable Energy Directive that I just mentioned. That's an interesting part, because there we have to look into, what's the state of play and what are the kind of the trade-offs that Peter mentioned as well. So this is something where we might come back to you on to see whether there are possibilities actually of how to get our heads around it. One way we are testing bio-based materials at the moment, and the uptake, is through what's called the EU Taxonomy on Sustainable Finance, which is in a set of criteria that activities need to comply with in order to be called environmentally sustainable. And we have defined here for buildings, for instance, if bio-based materials are used in buildings, that they have to have certain criteria, effectively recycled content criteria. So this has been agreed on last year, so we're still looking into how the private sector is reacting to these criteria at the moment. My second last slide is on bio-waste. Now, bio-waste is an area where it's not only 34% of municipal waste in the EU, 60% is food waste of that. But where we have identified, I showed you yesterday this big picture with the 4 quadrants and of the early warning report on waste. And on the bio-waste, this is something that we have identified where most action is needed. Part of that will hopefully now materialize because we have a separate collection obligation for bio-waste that kicked in at the end of last year in the EU, but also because currently we're proposing to have food waste reduction targets as part of the Waste Framework Directive revision that is ongoing now in trialogues to address this issue. But this is clearly something that is on our radar as well. And now my last slide, and I think maybe I have 2 more minutes. There is, of course, a potential of the bioeconomy, and I think Peter described it really well. But there is a big but. And that big but effectively is also something where the SEEA can contribute. I mean, we see from a study of the European Environmental Agency that a lot of, basically, there is a potential biomass gap, it's called, of 40 to 70%, depending on the scenarios you look into, between the demand for sustainably sourced biomass vis-a-vis what can be sustainably harvested within the EU by 2050. So the assessment is effectively we need to get much better into the bioeconomy in order to actually satisfy this demand. But what is also very important is that while I mentioned in the Renewable Energy Directive, we have quite a good set of criteria. It's not perfect, but quite a good set of criteria for biofuels and so on. There's very little at the moment on how we capture actually in criteria the cascading principle, which is a key element, of course, of the circular bioeconomy, and the kind of the trade-offs and co-benefits that we need to take into consideration. So there's a little bit of plea also when it comes to ecosystem service accounts, of course, but also on the broader usage of the bioeconomy to better understand, and I think there the SEEA can be very useful in better understand the kind of trade-offs that are there and to capture those, but also to capture the kind of opportunities and co-benefits on the economic side and potentially also on the environmental side. I'll stop here. So not many answers, many new questions, but if you have any good suggestions and ideas, very happy to hear them. Thanks very much.
Great, thanks, Florian. That's perfect timing as well, and I really enjoyed the anecdote about the recyclers. So there's a bit of homework for everybody when you go to the cafeteria at lunchtime, where you see the compostable cups that are being used in the cafeteria. So I want you to sort of figure out where do they end up, how are those removed from the United Nations site, and where do they go? Are they composted? Or do they end up in incineration? So answers on a postcard later. So Lucretia, it's a pleasure to welcome you next to present on the use of environmental accounts for policy making on circular economy and bioeconomy. So that's over to you, and I'll only come in if we look like we're creeping over time.
Thank you, Peter, for the presentation. Very quickly, just wanted to thank the organizers for having us here. It's really an honor to be here and be able to present to you what we have done in Costa Rica in terms of the use of our environmental accounts. Just briefly, for those of you who don't know Costa Rica, we're a small country in the Central America, 5.2 million people. It's funny, we have a very biodiverse country. We have many kinds of species of animals and birds. We have a lot of territorial sea, and we are one of the few countries that was able to revert deforestation. So today we have a 52% forest cover. Just a little bit of context of where we are. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the policies that we have implemented in our country for circular economy. So we have recently published the National Strategy for Circular Economy. This is the central element is to maintain products and materials at their maximum level of application for as long as possible while minimizing the environmental impact. So this has a vision, a long-term vision to 2050 for Costa Rica to become a leader in the region on circular economy, innovation, and sustainability. So this was developed by an interinstitutional committee to be able to achieve these goals, and the conceptual framework that was used to measure the transition towards a circular economy consults specific indicators of the environmental account. So this is where SEEA comes into place. There's the definition of 3 components in the strategy. We call it the ENEC, the strategy for circular economy. So the component 1 is measuring the impact of the effects that we expect as a result of the transition towards a fair circular economy. The second component is monitoring the transition. So what's going to happen in the transition that requires the circularity indicators. And the component 3 is just monitoring the implementation of the strategy. So to monitor the advance in the goals that these strategy proposes, there was many indicators coming from the environmental accounts that were consulted. I'm going to show you some examples here. From the first component, which is to measure the impact of the strategy. The strategy consults indicators from the material flow account and the water account. So for example, where the goal is to maximize the circularity of the materials, we use the direct material input indicator, and the arrows show us just where we want the indicator to go. So it represents all the materials that are available for the production system of the national economy. For example, we have also resource productivity, we have water intensity, where the goal is to ensure sustainable management of water resources. So, for example, we want water intensity to go down. We want less pressure on the water resources coming from the production systems of our economy. And here are some other examples for component 2, which is to monitor the transition that is proposed in the strategy to get to a more circular economy. So here we have some other indicators. For example, the energy intensity. So the goal is to support national policies for the decarbonization of the energy matrix and production systems. So it reflects the speed at which the energy consumption is decoupled from the growth of the economy. So we want that indicator to be lower. We also have some other water indicators, for example, final water use. This is upstream and instream water use, the treated wastewater, and also water losses, which is a very high indicator in our country. Half of the water is lost between in the distribution systems. I have one example of those indicators here, just as a context. This is the energy intensity in Costa Rica. It has been decreasing in the period from 2011 to 2021. You see the blue line is the value added, and then the orange line is the energy intensity. So for as the value added in our economy has been going up, our energy intensity has been coming down. So that's a good sign. And then we also have this national bioeconomy strategy, which was developed too. And this one, well, it's the production, use, conservation, and regeneration of biological resources, including knowledge, science, technology, and innovation related to these resources to provide information, products, processes, and services to all economic sectors with the purpose of advancing towards a sustainable economy. So this was also developed by an interministerial council that was in our country. The only difference is, for example, for the circular economy strategy, the leading institution is the Ministry of Environment, but for the bioeconomy national strategy, the leading institution is the one that has to do with like science, the ministry. And from here, we were able to come up with a pilot exercise. We still have a discussion whether to call it an exercise or an account. In the publication that I'm going to show you, we call it a bioeconomy pilot account because it follows like the same structure from national accounts and supply and use tables, but we're still on that debate because it isn't exactly like SEEA methodology. So this was a joint work between the Central Bank of Costa Rica and ECLAC, with the starting point for this exercise were the national accounts and the environmental accounts. We have this published, sadly only in Spanish, but if you have doubts, you can contact me. But it's the details of the entire exercise, which mainly consists of a reclassification. The starting point is the supply and use table, regular supply and use table of national accounts, and using the definition of bioeconomy. We use the one of following the national bioeconomy strategy. We just did a reclassification or organization of the activities first, and the first step from the ISIC codes. So each of the ISIC codes was assigned whether it was a characteristic of bioeconomy or non-characteristic of bioeconomy. So we just have those two classifications. And then in the second stage, we also have a national classification of activities, which is just a grouping or a nationalization of the ISIC. So it can have activities which are characteristics of bioeconomy or non-characteristic of bioeconomy. So here we end up with 3 classifications, because when one of the activities has all the ISIC codes, which are from bioeconomy, so we say it's an activity that is characteristic of bioeconomy. But when it has some of the codes that are related to bioeconomy and others that are not, we say it's an extended characteristic activity of bioeconomy. We use the assumption that if the bioeconomy part of the activity wasn't there, then the final production of that activity wouldn't have been able to come up. And then the rest is activities that are not related to bioeconomy. And we do the same for the products classification, the CPC, and then national classification of products. And from here, the results show that approximately 50% of the activities and products, there is some relationship with bioeconomy concepts. And for example, we have a total of 55 groups and 110 classes of economic activities are identified as bioeconomic. And from the national classification, we have 64 activities that are from bioeconomy and 72 products that are characteristic of bioeconomy. So here we can start to see the importance of bioeconomy in a country like ours. And from there, we just use the same structure to build a supply and use table for bioeconomy. So here we can see some of the numbers, the production of the first is the supply table, and then we have the use table of where we have the characteristic products representing a lot, as much as in the production as in the intermediate consumption for the economy of our country. And from this reclassification of activities and products, it is possible to know the contribution of the bioeconomy in the country's production. So just here we can see that we get the gross value added, and this represents 12.6%. This means that bioeconomy represents 12.6 or well, almost 13% of the value added in our economy. So here we can start to see the importance of these products and activities for our country. And also we have an implicit tax rate, which shows the fiscal impacts or what the fiscal policies have been doing according to these products and how much they depend on bioeconomic products. The implicit tax rate, which is just the taxes on products divided by the production, it's 8.37% for characteristic products and 2.49% for extended characteristic products. So it's a lot of impact for the fiscal policy. All of this data, I forgot to mention, the exercise was done for 2018. These data are updated to 2021. We're working on having a higher time series. And we have also the participation of the employment in characteristic products of bioeconomy, which is 17%, and extended characteristic products is 1%. So this shows that it also has a high impact on employment in our country. And finally, we did an application of doing the same thing with the supply and use tables of the environmental accounts. So it's just combining the energy account with this bioeconomy classification. So we also see the final use of energy in these activities that are characteristic to bioeconomy, which is 22.9% of the use of energy for these activities. So the lessons learned is in the first part, we saw the importance of the use of environmental accounts to monitor the transition of a country to a circular economy. This has been a really big step for us to be able to have the environmental accounts to guide us and inform policymakers on these decisions and coming up with these strategies. And we feel that the economy pilot, the bioeconomy pilot exercise, it's a good starting point. Is a good starting point to know the importance of bioeconomy in a country. We know there's a lot more to do, and it's just like it can give you a big overview because it's only like a reclassification of your regular system of national accounts. So you can really see the importance of bioeconomy in your country and then start working from there. It's available. It's just a reclassification, and it's easy to carry if you have the right inputs. So that's it for my part.
Okay, great. Thanks for that perfect timing. And let's move on then to Jocelyn, and I was intrigued by this title, Jocelyn, Measuring Stocks in the Urban Mine to Monitor Circular Economy with SEEA. I'm very familiar with urban mining of technical materials, so I'm looking forward to hearing what you've got to say about the biological. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Peter. Yes, so I will tell you more about how we measure the material stocks to measure circular economy, of which biomass is also part of this research. This is the outline of my presentation. Policy and data needs, the scope of this research on urban mine that we are conducting. Data sources, methods, and some results. And I'll end with some conclusions and next steps. So what here are the policy and data needs? So the government of the Netherlands has set some ambitious goals, in my opinion, to be 50% circular in 2030 and to reach 100% circular economy in 2050. We have to make some serious steps to get there. One important one is to shift from raw material use to secondary material use. And these materials come from somewhere. They come from, you could call it mines, and it's important if you want to shift from raw to secondary material use that you shift from the geological mines to the so-called urban mines, so the materials captured in your society. And Statistics Netherlands is aiming to monitor this transition to urban mining. There's already a lot of research going on material flows. We have the material flow accounts from the environmental accounts. And we also measure the so-called material flow monitor, which is a supply and use table of all the materials flowing in 1 year in our country, where we also make the bio monitor, so only looking at bio-based products and biomass. And now for this next question, we are exploring to measure the material stocks. We call it a material stock monitor. And the objective here is to support decision and policy makers on swifting to secondary material use instead of importing or extracting raw materials. And we do this from a macroeconomic perspective. So in short, if you have insight in the materials in our society, the stocks, and we combine this with extra information on, for example, the lifespan or life cycle of products or plans to renovate buildings or infrastructure, we gain insight in the available materials now and in the future, the so-called urban mine. So what is the scope? As just mentioned, it's a macroeconomic view that we're looking at. So we are aiming to include all the products and goods that are man-made in our economy and households in our society. And we use these 7 categories. So first is buildings like houses, offices, shops, the main infrastructure, roads, etc. Energy system we also look at separately, so everything to produce and transport and use energy. So for example, solar panels and wind turbines are included here. Transportation means our bicycles are there. And electronics and machines as a separate category. Consumer goods, which is of course a long list, you can imagine. And the last category is a separate one on textile. And the scope for materials is we are also aiming at including all the materials that are included in those products and goods and buildings. So we separate the construction materials, metals, and here we have biomass as a separate category for the materials. This is wood and the bio-based product materials and textile. And then for us, it's also relevant to look at the critical raw materials as a separate category. For example, if you want to look at energy transition. And then we remain with an other where plastic is and some other materials. So I've mentioned urban mine before. What we mean by that is the accumulated stock of materials that are in all of our products with a lifespan over 2 years. So what's excluded here is the food, for example, that is consumed within 2 years. It's really the long-term materials that are captured in our economy and society, and that at one point can be recovered and used. So you can mine these materials. SEEA focuses, if you look at the assets in SEEA, they are extending with environmental assets. So we also include the natural land and the land and natural resources. But the focus here on the stocks is actually the economic assets to measure the materials in those economic assets, but with an environmental aim. So to look at possible, more sustainable secondary material use of these economic assets. So shortly on data sources and methods. To measure all this, we would like information on the quantity of the product, so how many windmills are there, etc. The lifespan of products, life cycles, and or the planning to renovate or demolish buildings, for example. Information on consumer goods, and lastly also material intensity. So how much does a product weigh and which materials are included in those products. And we have a variety of data sources that we use. Some are our own national statistics that we can use, or geographical registers, and some are more experimental, or we have to take it from literature studies. That's mostly the material intensity. We don't calculate that ourselves, but we are dependent on experts. So if we look at geographical registers, we can take the informations that are on certain maps, like maps of buildings and physical objects like infrastructure. I'll spare you the acronyms, they're in Dutch. And these maps contain detailed information on where those buildings are located, and extra information on what is the area of the buildings, in which year is it constructed. That's of course also relevant to look at which materials are in there. And for infrastructure, the bridges where they are located, but also what type of bridge it is. So we use two methodologies to calculate how much material we have captured in our urban mine. First for buildings, infrastructure, energy, and transport. Simply put, we multiply quantity by the material intensity. So, for example, if you look at vehicles, if we know how many cars there are in our country, and we know how much those cars weigh, and how much metal is in there, and how much textile, and how much glass, etc. We multiply these figures and we get our material stock. And here we can really improve the results with some additional data. So for example, we know how many electric vehicles we have and how many non-electrical vehicles. And also the difference in material intensity. So the batteries, of course, have a different material than the other cars. And this is with all the categories. The more detail you have, the more useful the results will be. And the second method is for consumer goods, electronics, machines, and textile. And there we combine information on the so-called put on market, so the inflow of products, with the lifespan of these products, so also looking back. information from the waste accounts, and we combine this information to see how much of those goods are still in our economy, which sometimes can be quite a challenge. If you look, for example, at mobile phones, it's very interesting to really delve into that, but it's sometimes hard to know if someone buys a new one, if the other one goes into a drawer somewhere in your house, or you throw it away for recycling. So a lot of possibilities to improve here. And then some results for the Netherlands. The figure on the left includes all the 7 categories. I hope it's big enough to read. And then the colors are the material types. And yeah, so on the left, you see that buildings and infrastructure have a lot of construction materials. But for the rest, you can't really see what is happening. So the figure on the right is the same, but excluding construction materials. And there, orange is biomass. You can see the orange popping out, buildings still the highest for the Netherlands. And that is all the wood that is used in our construction. And also consumer goods and textile, of course, you see some biomass captured there. So this next slide, the figure on the left is the same, and the figure on the right excludes those 2 big categories. So without buildings and infrastructure. And now biomass is the gray color. You can see there's a lot in consumer goods, and that's mainly furniture. So all the wooden furniture, but also toys and all other kinds of consumer goods that have wood in them or bio-based materials. And here you can see that the transportation then also is, yeah, we have a lot of material in our urban mine there if we want to reuse the metals. And this is from a previous study on the building. So if we know the geographical location of the buildings, we can also make maps of it. This is the Netherlands, and you can see that in the big cities in Amsterdam, the color is red, meaning that the material intensity is high there. So a lot of kilograms per square meter. And this is for all the buildings, all the materials. But what is nice that you can zoom in on specific materials if you're interested in only where is the wood located, or metal or other materials. You can exclude the others. The same for product groups. So these are all the buildings, but if you only want to look at the houses or specific types of houses, you can also make that analysis. Then I've reached my conclusions. Next step, my last slide. So we see that there's demand for more statistics to measure a circular economy. So not only the material flows, but now there's also interest in the material stocks. And also to look forward. So should we in the future be importing or extracting these raw materials, or can we depend on what is captured in our urban mine? And with this analysis, there are multiple applications possible. So here we've looked at a macroeconomic view, but you can zoom in if you're interested in the biomass or the critical raw materials, or specific products or categories, which gives you an insight in the circularity of those types. And some other conclusions that the bulk materials are in our buildings and infrastructure. And if you look at biomass, it's also the buildings where the most biomass is captured. To reach these results, we actually needed many data sources, and you can add quite some detail or make it complex if you want to get more detail in your results. And that is actually where a challenge for us is as well. This research was first done by a university, and now we as a statistical office have are trying to create a statistical production process so that we can measure this biannually. And then the frequent updates of the data sources is actually our main challenge, not the data that we have in-house, but material intensity and the lifespan and durability of products. That changes, of course, and there are a lot of efforts to design products differently and to make them more suitable for a circular economy. And that is really what we would like to capture here as well. So that would be our next steps. But measuring all this also gives an opportunity to look at circular economy from a different angle. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jocelyn. Perfect timing, and another really, really interesting national case study. It's always great to see the statistics being brought to life in a national context. So we've got about 20 minutes before lunch. Is there anybody who wants to kick off with a question or an observation? USA.
I'll kick off this question session. I've got two questions for the Netherlands. The first one is what you did possible without having a business register? Because that's something the US certainly doesn't have. And the second question is, when you're talking about urban mines, in the SEEA, landfills are part of the economy still. And there's been talk about mining landfills actually for aluminum cans. And as soon as the aluminum prices get high enough, that will dig up all the Budweiser cans. So I was just wondering whether you've thought about what the boundary is on what you're including compared, and are landmines then a new resource in the circular economy? Thank you.
Questions aimed at Jocelyn or? Okay, but Florian. Okay, building register. Okay, Jocelyn, then I see Florian might want to come in as well. So Jocelyn, do you want to try a response to those two questions?
Yes, thanks USA for your questions. So we actually haven't used a business register in this project because with those businesses, we actually want to know how big is their office and those types of materials, stocks captured in their products. But to look at this product, we used international trade statistics and production statistics to see which goods are consumed in that year. I hope that answers the question a bit, but
about the building register.
Building register. Do you want to try? Or Florian, did you want to come in on? No, Jocelyn, do you want? I can say something about because we've done a lot of work on urban stock mining for buildings and construction materials. So there's two types of buildings. There's those that lie outside of the building information management era, where the plans have been lost. Nobody knows quite how they were built, and then there were those that have been built since, where there's digital information. So we've constructed a 4D model that enables to model material intensity around building age, around structural and non-structural materials at scale, which is automated, which is a combination of GIS and Google Earth and various other data sources, which gives us a first approximation of the volume of material, its age, its potential condition, which you then validate through at the appropriate time through on-site collaborations with demolition companies or FM operators or major landlords. So that gives you a first pass. Obviously, if you have digitized and you have a digital twin for the building, which is increasingly the case, then that puts you into a completely different ball game where you can get down to the component level. You could probably know something about its condition. That usually applies to public buildings, certainly in the UK, but increasingly to commercial buildings. So rather like Jocelyn, we've built up a series of city scale sort of maps and inventories, and most importantly is trying to understand the matching of supply and demand. When are these buildings likely to be released or come to the end of their technical or economic life? And at certain spatial scale, what is the likely demand for those materials if you can recover them, reclaim them as product from those stocks? So we've published quite a lot. There's quite a live academic publication sort of literature. We work with companies who have now developed commercial models to extract structural brick, structural steel, structural concrete, as well as glass, timber, and other sort of internal furnishings for reuse and repurposing. So that, I mean, that's on that. The second question was about mining landfills. And any experience of that, Jocelyn or Florian?
Yes, thank you for that question. Conceptually, we would like to include landfills as well. It's not nature, not the environment. So actually, I've noted it to look more into that because we currently don't do it. But yeah, you could see it as a source for reminding. Yeah, so thank you.
Thanks. Just quickly on Julie's question, because indeed that's something I had in mind as well, and the key reason is not necessarily on the bioeconomy as such, but in the context, because that is a category that you include as well on the critical raw materials. Indeed, the CRM, the Critical Raw Materials Act, also will make us look into that. What are kind of the critical raw materials that we can recover from landfills, but also old mines, for instance, as well. So this is something that I would also encourage you to, from a policymaker perspective, it's easy to make demand. So I do that. So that would be quite an encouragement. And the second element, if I may, this would have been a question, is basically whether you can include some form of possibility of how much is the potential of the recovery. Because we you know, for buildings, for instance, now we're talking about biomass, so timber in construction, some of that might be actually be reusable, or at least some other form of use instead of incinerating and so on. So maybe there is a possibility for you to also see, you know, I don't know, 80% of that is possibly being recoverable, you know, something like that. That could be quite interesting from a policy perspective as well. Thanks.
Okay, great. I've got 4 questions lined up in this order. France, EC at the back, UNECE and UK. So let's go to France first.
Thank you. I have a question to Costa Rica. Thank you for your presentation. Very interesting. First question, do you include into the characteristic activities of bioeconomy organic farming, and how is it compiled? As a second question, if you allow me, but it's more general. I don't know, this is for the panel, maybe for DGN, I don't know. Do we consider bioeconomy as a subsector of circular economy, or is it a sector per se by itself? This is a question that came into my mind. Just thank you.
Lucrecia?
Yes, thank you for the question. The answer is yes, because most of the agricultural activities are included as bioeconomy. So intrinsically, the organic production of agriculture is included in the bioeconomy pilot exercise. And it's interesting the second question that you make about whether bioeconomy is part of the circular economy, because we can talk about circular bioeconomy, right? That is more of instead of trying to reduce the consumption of products, right? Try to make this upcycling. So we have been looking into it. We have started discussing about the which would be the percentage of this bioeconomy that is circular bioeconomy. We haven't still gotten around on how to do it, but it would be interesting, and we're hoping that it's a high percentage, but we haven't gotten around to how to do it yet. We haven't have the answer.
Okay, we'll come back to other members of the panel on that last question if we have time, but let's go to the European Commission at the back.
Can you hear me? Okay. Well, actually, I was struggling whether to ask this question already in the previous session, but I felt I was a bit out of scope. But after the presentation of Professor Hopkins, and specifically on this concept of upcycling and increasing to increase the amount of natural capital, provide more and more clean opportunities, I think there is room to ask for it. We have heard about organic farming in the previous session. We heard about bioeconomy now, but in terms of expenditure, what about considering the investment in nature-based solutions? Because, for example, to invest in green infrastructure is more expensive than to invest in green infrastructure, but green infrastructure in the long term may bring more benefit for many environmental policy issues, climate change, both mitigation and adaptation, but also circular economy. And I'm really relying on this concept of upcycling. Now, the practical issue should be how to proceed about it. And maybe for this, it's also important to understand whether there is a specific lens on nature-based solution, on how to consider investments in nature-based solution. And probably this is a question that I would also like to hear a Eurostat point of view in the reorganization of this classification of environmental protection activities. But in general, I really would like to hear from all of you what you think about it. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, we probably only get time for one panel member, given the time. We've got 10 minutes and we've got some of the questions coming in. But would anyone like to take the question about nature-based solutions, and are they more expensive? And what are the implications for investment? Anyone? I mean, yeah, right. Does Eurostat want to comment on that? Yeah, we can discuss it over lunch if possible. A quick answer from Eurostat.
Very quick and not complete, definitely. Yeah, okay, first, I'm not sure I got exactly the colleague questions. The bioeconomy, I think we have tried, it's identifiable in the new classification, this is for sure. Whether it covers exactly everything that you would like to put in bioeconomy, I think this is maybe different questions. So definitely through the classification and implementing it in some environmental accounts, we may have some measures. Investment will be part of it as well. So I think it's more a question of the delineation, the scope of what you put in bioeconomy as such. We can discuss it later.
Yeah. Okay. And over lunch, if you want to carry on that discussion, we've been doing work on nature-based solutions for flood risk management to show that they're less expensive, they're more adaptive, they're more resilient, and they're lower carbon. So if you want to look at an infrastructure case example, we can talk about that. Michael, you've been waiting to ask your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I try to give the good example of being short. I've been listening carefully to your presentation, Peter, and you made a very clear point, saying you need to distinguish between biological materials and technical materials, because there is a different kind of logic behind measuring circularity for a good reason. And there is also this quality aspect, and Florian mentioned this as well, right? So identifying what kind of biomaterial, actually what quality do you have, so that you can maybe reuse it, maybe with lower, like following the cascading principle, right? So for lower quality, but can use it. So my question to Costa Rica and maybe also Netherlands is, according to your experience, I mean, does that data qualify already for biomaterials or biological materials to say what quality aspect do we have? Or is this something that is missing? And maybe this is also something that could be considered in the SEEA revision process, like to recommend a kind of, I don't know, classification or so that includes a kind of quality criterion for biomaterials. So what is your experience in that regard?
I wasn't involved in most of the technical part of making this exercise, but I know that in our experience, one of the hard parts in trying to measure the bioeconomy is the innovation part that is involved in bioeconomy, because you have this clear relationship between organic products and biomass and everything, but it also implies a part of this innovation in products and investments in better technologies that is really hard to measure directly with the use of classification just by activities and products. So that's something that we are hoping that SEEA can help us in their next revision.
Yes, very short maybe. I think many times how we measure the bio flows or the biomass in materials is to put and share on the total materials. So it's also based on assumptions or expert knowledge. But I think it would be better to really go at the source and already know when if you want to measure the consumer goods or which materials are included, that you already know, okay, these are the types of materials that are in there, instead of at the end saying 30% is biomass. That would already also help to get better results.
Can I just make a quick comment on the question that you asked, Michael? Because indeed, I think that links with two elements that I mentioned. The first one is kind of the recoverability element. So if you were to have different classifications on the quality of biomass, you might be able to derive that in a more granular way. And the second part, which from a policy perspective, at least in the EU, will really be key in the next years, is to understand exactly this, how to implement the cascading principle. Because it's a great principle. In theory, it's amazing, and it's exactly how to link the bioeconomy with the circular economy. But how to actually do that in practice, it's not clear, at least in my head, it's not clear. And there, the quality element and how you would define it, and there you might have quite a big role effectively in defining then these criteria, if you do it on a statistical basis already at that time, then I think that's quite a step forward. It could be quite a step forward. Thanks.
Longer conversation, I think, but I think we have the UK and then Sweden. So is that Andrew? Yeah, if we keep the questions short and then
yes.
Very quick.
Yeah, again, many thanks, Peter, and many thanks to the speakers for such interesting presentations. Question, I think, for Jocelyn. I was interested in the 2-year lifespan assumption for the urban mining. I think, for example, in the UK, sadly, for example, with textiles, the so-called fast fashion scene, sometimes things are bought as brand new, but with the intention of probably discarding after a few months, let alone years. And I think also with electronic goods, electrical equipment, there can be cases where particularly people on low incomes might go for price as the key variable and unwittingly purchase something that doesn't really last very long. And therefore the 2-year lifespan might be optimistic. So I was just wondering really about the derivation of that 2-year dimension. Thanks.
Yes, thank you for your question. Yeah, it's a good question and very relevant, of course, that we throw away stuff that we could use longer. But what I can say about it here is that we are aiming to combine the insights that we get from our material flow monitor and our material stock monitor. So these flows that you mentioned, that you buy clothes and you throw it away within a year, or, those are all captures in the information where we look at the flows. And here, when look at urban mining, we are really aiming at the more longer term data.
Okay, great. Sweden.
So my question is carrying on the discussion of urban mines and buildings, and specifically, if I understand the Netherlands data correctly, it's the total stock of the urban mine. But in reality, you know, a lot of people are using these buildings right now. So do you have some kind of a measure of or an assessment of when those buildings will be available? And I'm thinking about this next step because once you have an urban mine, and if we carry on the analogy further, then you want to have urban miners as well. And that's the sort of business case, that's what you're looking at doing. And maybe if Peter, you can comment on this as well, because I think you've been looking into that.
Yeah, it's a good question because that's exactly what we would like to answer with making this data. So when are those materials become available? And here, when you look at buildings, we have to combine it with information that we have on plans to renovate. So we also know from all the buildings when it is constructed, but some are constructed in the 1500s and they still exist. So you really need some extra information on that. And that is not a fully complete register, but we just need additional information from the housing building market. Yep.
2 points. One is we need to transform the construction, the demolition industry from destructive downcycling to upcyclers. And secondly, what we're seeing is the tremendous innovation in small areas around robotics, digital twins that enable you to really understand the structure of the building and improve the speed and reduce the cost at which you can recover and reclaim the products of interest and make sure that everything gets reused down to, you know, the last brick or the last piece of timber, and notwithstanding the need to be able to sort of also measure its quality and its second use. So I think we're going to run out of time here. I can feel Johanna sort of getting hungry next to me. So back to you, Johanna.
Yeah, I do have a tendency to get a bit cranky when I'm hungry, so we want to avoid that. Yeah, so thank you for this really interesting session, and I urge you to keep on the discussion during lunch and coffee breaks. And after lunch, we will continue with the really interesting session on physical flows of plastics at 2:30. But before breaking for lunch, I know, Michael, I will give you the floor for some announcements because we have at least group picture coming up, so let us know.
Thank you, Johanna. I will be quick with my announcement because we don't want to see Johanna hangry. Now it's about the group picture. So my colleague Sasha already arrived. So he's here with a professional camera. And please follow us all. I think we do the picture outside. The weather is nice, I think, Sasha, right? This is correct? So please, everybody move outside. He will arrange us. He will put us to the right place. We make an awesome picture that you can all have afterwards. And one announcement about more the substance of the meeting. My colleague from OECD Santaro is trying to make short conclusions of all the sessions so that we have a kind of input for the concluding session tomorrow. So he might reach out to the chairs of the previous sessions and double check with them what should be kind of presented as the main conclusions. So that's all. So please group picture now. You don't run away before we don't have the group picture. Towards the restaurant, so we move to the right slowly and we meet at the stairs. Thank you.